everybody! Today we're talking about blood! And when we think about blood, a lot of people think that's just one component, but really there's so much more than just one thing in blood. So we're going to look at all of the things that make blood what it is today, and kind of understand at a deeper level how our body functions because our blood is made this specific way. So in this infographic, you can see that blood is really broken down into a bunch of different pieces. We are going to look at a lot of these. Some of these we won't get to, but if you ever have questions, let that curiosity propel you forward. All right, blood is 3 to 4 times more viscous than water. So it's thicker than water and it's slightly heavier. That's because of all the parts that really are inside of blood besides just water. Our pH of blood, when it is at a healthy level, should be around 7.35 to 7.45. And blood is mainly composed in liquid form. We call that the plasma. And then the rest of it, which is like kind of solids, we call them formed elements. So we'll take a look at those three things specifically in more detail. But we've got erythrocytes or red blood cells. You'll see them often abbreviated as RBCs when we talk about those in this lecture. We are going to talk about leukocytes or white blood cells, often abbreviated as WBCs, and we are also going to talk about platelets. So it's like fragments of other types of cells. They are formed in our marrow, and we're going to look at what role all of those play. When we talk a lot about blood, especially in the medical sense, sometimes you'll go to the doctor and they'll do a blood draw. Usually this is normal and can happen at any physical, but this is just going to take like a deeper look at your what's going on in your blood, and it can determine any abnormalities that you might have going on. So a small sample of your blood is taken. It is put in a test tube and put into a centrifuge, or sometimes they can get the blood to separate in other ways. And that centrifuge is going to spin the blood around super fast so it gets split up into the plasma elements and the solids. The percentage of red blood cells in our whole blood is called hematocrit or HCT, and it's almost half of our blood volume. So those red blood cells is about 45% of our blood volume. When we look at just the white blood cells and platelets, that's a really small percent of our blood volume. It's only 1%. And finally, plasma is a little over half. It's 55% of our blood volume. So if we're looking at those on this diagram over here, we can see, this bottom part, which is a little less than half, that's what we're looking at, that 45% of blood volume. The plasma is that 55%, and then anything that's left, we can see it in this small line on the side here, which is just white blood cells and platelets. All right, so if we dive into this first component of our blood, we're going to look at the red blood cells, fan favorite over here. They're also known as erythrocytes, and they are shaped like a biconcave disc. And what that means is it's got that special shape that we can see off to the side here. I think it looks kind of like an inner tube that you might go like floating down a river on, but it's got that like donut shape in here, so it kind of like folds inward on itself, and it does that on both sides. And what that folding does is it increases its surface area, and we want a lot of surface area on these red blood cells because they do a super important thing. They carry hemoglobin, which we may have heard that before, but hemoglobin is a really special protein that is mostly of what a red blood cell does. And that protein is carrying a bunch of oxygen. So anytime our blood goes to our lungs to pick up oxygen that we're breathing in, we are getting it bound to hemoglobin in our blood. So if I'm writing off to the side of my notes here, I may be making a connection to this hemoglobin it's picking up that oxygen in our lungs. And if you're really intrigued by the chemical side of this, there's some iron that is in hemoglobin, and that's what is able to bind to the oxygen that we breathe into our lungs. When hemoglobin is oxygenated, or we can call it oxyhemoglobin, we see that represented as a really bright red color. So that bright red indicates oxygen has bound to the iron in hemoglobin. And if there's no oxygen or very little oxygen in that hemoglobin, we call it deoxyhemoglobin, and we see that blood as a darker red. In your textbook, it's often shown in blue and not dark red, but in reality, the oxygenated hemoglobin is bright red, the deoxygenated hemoglobin is dark red. And these red blood cells are kind of funky because they do not have mitochondria, and they're not using any of the oxygen they carry. They're not using that for cellular respiration. They are only like shipping that off. So I think about this as like they're just shipping oxygen around the body. So the only way these cells get energy is through a process called glycolysis. And if you're taking AP Bio, you know what I'm talking about. And these red blood cells are produced from stem cells in red bone marrow. So if you think back to our skeletal system unit, you may remember that in red bone marrow, that's where these red blood cells are produced. The average lifespan of a red blood cell lasts only about 120 days. The red blood cells need to be like consistently and constantly replaced throughout our body so they can continue to keep getting us oxygen. And there's a hormone that you may remember from our previous unit. Erythropoietin is the hormone that controls the rate of how many red blood cells we are formed like in our body all the time. So I'm already thinking I'm going to write a little note here, a little endocrine connection. And so what happens is our kidneys and our liver are going to release this hormone in response to low oxygen. So this could be like if you are living in a place where you're not getting enough oxygen, or maybe there's something going on with your body where you're not able to get enough oxygen into your bloodstream. But a really good example of how this happens is for people who live in places of high altitude. So if you've ever gone hiking in the mountains, right? It sometimes feels hard to breathe when you're there because there's less oxygen in places with higher altitude. So your blood oxygen levels also decrease there. When that oxygen is low, that triggers the release of this hormone, which stimulates red blood cells to be produced in your body. That rate is produced until your tissues have enough oxygen, and then that hormone will decrease and return to like a normal level. Sometimes this is why a lot of athletes will train in higher altitudes. So if you're trying to run a marathon and you decide you're going to train in Denver and then come back to run that in Madison, it might feel like it's super easy to breathe when you come back to those lower altitudes. And red blood cells can get disrupted by different diseases. One that's really common, I know part of our biology unit in ninth grade is talking about this specific disease that happens, sickle cell disease, which is when the red blood cell, it literally looks like a sickle, right? So it doesn't have that nice, like concave shape that we see up here where it's like nice on each side like that. It is kind of flattened. It looks like a crescent moon or like the sickle that you would use to gather wheat. And because they're kind of crushed like this, it is really hard for those red blood cells to carry oxygen. So a lot of symptoms for people who have sickle cell disease is a lot of those symptoms are caused by like the lack of oxygen there. So in your notes, there's a little space to talk about what might happen to somebody who has sickle shaped red blood cells instead of these normal like donut shaped red blood cells. Another type of blood cell that we're looking at are white blood cells. These are also known as leukocytes, and they protect us against disease. So if you like being healthy and not sick, thank a white blood cell. These white blood cells travel in our blood to the site of an infection, or a site where bacteria might be, or a site where a parasite could be. And these white blood cells do something kind of special. They can leave our blood vessels. So what happens is they're like squeezing between the walls of our smallest blood vessels, and they can leave circulation. So they're the only ones that do that. You can kind of see that in this infographic here as well. Those white blood cells are leaving the vessel so they can be in any of our other tissues. These develop from stem cells that are also in red bone marrow. So there are 5 different white blood cells that we have in our body. The first one that we're looking at is neutrophils. Neutrophils are the ones that I think a lot of people maybe have seen videos of, where they will like aggressively hunt down and kill or like kind of surround and eat bacteria. Eosinophils are a type of white blood cell that kills certain parasites. So if you're somebody who's ever had tapeworms or roundworms, these are the white blood cells that are working to kill those parasites that are trying to live off of you. Basophils are types of white blood cells. They travel to damaged tissues to increase blood flow to an area. So if you are somebody, you've gotten hit in a soccer game, and there's some damaged tissue there, you want a lot of blood flow in that area because it's going to bring all the stuff you need to get healed. These also play a major role in allergic reactions. They are what drop off like histamines and things that make you like get swollen eyes or swollen sinuses if you're having an allergic reaction. Monocytes are white blood cells that can leave and transform into different type of macrophages, so they can go off and hunt certain things. And finally, we're going to look at lymphocytes. They're white blood cells that work in our lymphatic organs, so our lymph nodes and spleen mainly, and they play a huge role in immunity and helping our body learn what diseases it should be fighting off. Here's just a little animation, or it's not an animation. Here's just a little, like a video from a microscope slide watching a white blood cell hunting down some bacteria and eating it, which I think is cool.
And kill bacteria. In this spread, a neutrophil is seen in the midst of red blood cells. Staphylococcus aureus bacteria have been added. The small clump of bacteria release a chemoattractant that is sensed by the neutrophil. The neutrophil becomes polarized and starts chasing the bacteria. The bacteria, bounced around by thermal energy, move in a random path, seeming to avoid their predator. Eventually, the neutrophil catches up with the bacteria and engulfs them by phagocytosis.
Yeah, so that's just how they hunt down those bacteria so they don't reproduce and wreak havoc upon our bodies. So thank you, neutrophil white blood cells. All right, the next part of our blood components that we're looking at are platelets. Platelets are also called thrombocytes, and their main function is to help form clots to stop bleeding. So, if you've ever gotten a cut somewhere, which we probably all have, these are what helps us from not like bleeding out from something really small. So, if you've ever had a scab, right? That's formed by those platelets. These are formed from fragments of megakaryocytes, which are large cells in our red bone marrow, and if they break off, those platelets are what we have left. So if we have any damage in our body, these platelets are forming kind of like a temporary plug, which you can see in this infographic off to the right. So when they start collecting like this and finally come all together, it kind of stops the bleeding and it allows us to not have any internal bleeding or external bleeding that doesn't stop. What is cool about platelets is they normally, if they're together, they start clumping up together. But there is nitric oxide in our body that keeps them inactive so they're not clotting up all the time and wrecking our whole blood flow system. If you're somebody who has a low platelet count, that would put you at risk for internal bleeding or like getting, if you get a cut, it would be really tough to stop that bleeding. And that could happen for a variety of reasons. It could happen because you have a genetic condition. You might have leukemia. Radiation can cause this. There's certain medicines that have that side effect. Exposure to toxic chemicals, even heavy alcohol consumption, or certain viruses or autoimmune diseases. All right, finally, we're going to look at our last little component of blood here, which is plasma. It's the clear liquid portion of the blood. It's what all of our cells and platelets are suspended in and travel around in as it goes around our body. Plasma is mostly water. It's 92% water. If you're a properly hydrated individual, um, woo, so that 92% water, if you're properly hydrated, is making up a lot of our plasma. And what that plasma does for us is it helps transport gases, the gases that we're thinking of that should be traveling around in our blood, our oxygen and carbon dioxide, right? This plasma can also transport vitamins and nutrients. It regulates our fluid and electrolyte balance and maintains a healthy pH level for us. And there's three main proteins that are found in plasma that help us out. There's albumins, which help regulate water movement between blood and tissues. So that's this type of stuff that keeps us nice and hydrated. There's globulins, which transport lipids and fat soluble vitamins, and fibrogens, which help us with blood clotting. So think about those platelets that we just saw before when thinking about the three main proteins of plasma. All right, and we're going to review some blood types again. We have talked about blood types in ninth grade bio, and we should have also reviewed them in class when we were talking about blood. But just in case we still need a refresher, here we are. So we have four different blood types that we've looked at, and what you are doing in your notes is making sure you draw a red blood cell for each of them, and you're drawing what you are seeing attached to each blood cell. So for blood group A, we're seeing different shapes attached to that red blood cell than we do blood group B. For blood group AB, we should be seeing, okay, we've got the B proteins that are attached to this as well as the A proteins. And what's different about blood group O is that red blood cell does not have any of those antigens on the blood cell. So that's what's making O a little bit special from the other ones is there's no antigens that we're seeing on there. And off to the side in your margins of these notes, I would be making a note unless you really know everything about antigens and antibodies. But when we say the term antigen, that's talking about any molecule that could trigger an immune response in the body. And we're talking about an antibody. That's a protein that the immune system is producing in response to a non self antigen. So you can have lots of things in your body, but when your body thinks something is foreign, your immune system is going to say, that's not me, that's not myself, and send out some antibodies to help you out. And those antibodies are going to react with antigens. And that's what this key component right here is what we're going to talk about when we talk about what happens if you get a blood transfusion from someone you should not be getting blood from. So if you've had a blood transfusion or maybe you know someone who has, that's when someone is getting blood from one individual to another. But the thing is here, not all blood types can be given to another blood type. And so if that is to happen, some bad things could happen. So if a transfusion is mismatched, symptoms that could occur are anxiety, difficulty breathing, facial flushing. You can get a headache, severe pain in the neck and chest or lumbar area, the red blood cells can burst. When that happens, the hemoglobin is released into your bloodstream, so that protein that bonds with oxygen. If there's free hemoglobin just floating through your bloodstream, your liver cells and macrophages will consume that hemoglobin and they convert it to a molecule called bilirubin. If you have a lot of bilirubin buildup in your body, it turns your skin yellow or you can get jaundice. And if hemoglobin is free floating through the bloodstream and it eventually reaches the kidneys, it can cause them to fail. And if your kidneys fail, you are in trouble. So do not go transfusing blood to all your friends just for a fun bonding activity unless you all know your blood types and have a doctor present. One thing we are adding when we talk about blood types here is the RH group or the RH factor. So when we say RH group or RH factor, we are now talking about the part of blood when people say that they are like A positive or A negative, or they're AB positive or they're AB negative. So the RH group is indicating if your blood type is positive or negative. If you have RH antigens present on your red blood cell, so if those antigens, if they're present, if they're around, that's indicating you have RH positive blood. But if you do not have antigens present, so they are not around, they're absent, that indicates that your blood is RH negative. This one is recessive, so it's not a dominant trait that you can inherit. It's a recessive trait, and it's rare. If you have negative blood, only 15% of the US population is RH negative, so you're very special. And the anti RH antibodies, so those things that are working with our immune system to tell if something is not ourselves or not, they are only present in the RH negative individuals. So if you have positive blood, you can get a transfusion from negative blood, you can get transfusions from positive blood, but if you are someone with negative blood, you can only get a blood transfusion from someone who also has negative blood. And there's also kind of a crazy story about if someone who is pregnant has negative blood and they are pregnant with a fetus that has positive blood and any of that blood crosses over, that person who is pregnant, if they get pregnant again, their body can recognize that another fetus with positive blood is foreign, and those antibodies will start attacking the blood of the fetus, which is bad for the fetus. So doctors now monitor that and give people medications if that is potentially going to happen. But before we knew what was going on, that could have been super detrimental to the fetus. So, because some blood types have different antigens on them, and other people do not have those same antigens, their body can see those blood transfusions as harmful and as like foreign, and as like a bad substance to have in our body. So, people who have blood type A negative can only get blood from two other blood types. One is their own blood type. You can always get blood from your own blood type. The other one is O. So O negative can always donate blood to someone who's A negative. If you're A positive, you can get blood from also A positive, also A negative, and also both O's. If you're B negative, you can only get it from B negative and also O. If you're B positive, you can get it from B positive, B negative, and both O's. If you're AB negative, you can get blood from all of the blood types that are still negative. If you're AB positive, here's where you really lucked out. You can get blood from absolutely everybody, you lucky duck. If you're O negative, you can get blood from just O negative. sad all alone. And if you're O positive, you can get positive O blood. You can also get negative O blood. That is blood type. So you've got a part of your notes that you are filling out what types of blood type can accept and donate. Please fill that out. And also make sure you are filling out that summary, and I will see you soon. Well, bye. Do your best.